Om Agnenaya Supatharaye Asman Vishvani Deva Vayunani Vidvan Yuyodhyasma Juhurana Meno Bhuyishtham Te Nama Uktim Vidhema Om Agnaye Namaha. Hello, welcome back to the Yajna course. We are excited to be starting the next section of the course today on the Vedic Yajna rituals. We have just completed the section on all the scriptural sources and some of the background information. And of course, we'll be giving more background information in this section of the class as well. It's all very interesting and very important to have some knowledge of this because, of course, the modern ceremonies that we'll be teaching soon are based upon this really vast and truly interesting, truly sophisticated, complex, and powerful Vedic system of worship, which is Yajna. So without further ado, we will share the slideshow. And we have shared the notes for this section as well, so that you don't have to be constantly writing down all the terms that I'm speaking about and trying to figure out the spellings of everything. And so this is our introductory slide. And we have an image here of a Vedic Yajna. And so that I don't know if this is a big Soma Yajna or what, but this is a Vedic ceremony. And so we'll skip to the next slide. It talks about the types of Agni. And so three principal forms of Agni are Aditya, the Agni in the sun, the light of the sun is that fire in the sky, a source of light in the universe, source of heat in our galaxy anyway. And then we have Vidyut Agni, which is the lightning. And then Badavanala. Badavanala is the fire in the center of the earth. And the scientists tell us that in the center of the earth, it's hot, it's like fiery. And in the Vedic times, the sages had knowledge of this. Interesting, right? How did they have knowledge of this? The scientists have their techniques and their methods and their instruments that will tell us things like that. The Vedic sages, of course, they meditated on this kind of thing. They knew the distance of the sun to the earth, from the earth to the moon. They knew the distance or the difference between the radius of the sun and the earth and the moon. And it's amazing how they knew these things, and it's very precise, the Vedic calculations. I believe until the 1970s or so, the calculations of NASA were less precise than the calculations of the Vedic sages they came to in their meditations. And if it's not exactly precise, it's fairly precise. For all practical purposes, it may as well be exact. And so we have 5 natural forms of fire as well. We've talked about 3, now we'll talk about 5. And so these 5 sources are Alaukika Agni, or Laukika Agni, the common earthly fire. Like if you start a forest fire, a campfire, hopefully you start a campfire, not a forest fire, especially for people watching out in the West Coast and the Midwest, where they have a lot of forest fires. Hopefully we're not talking about a forest fire, but all of that is a form of this Laukika Agni. And then we have the Dava Agni, which is another name for the lightning. This is related to Indra. Of course, the Agni is related to the Agni, the deity. Then we have Divyagni, the sun, is related to Surya, one of the Vedic names for the sun. And then we have Jataragni. Jatara is the stomach. And so this is the fire of digestion in the body. This relates to Vaishvanara. And then we have Badavagni, the fire of total destruction, lays under the sea, dormant in the mouth of the volcanoes. So there's also 5 ritual forms of the sacred fire. We have the Brahmagni, fire created through churning, friction with the sticks. Of course, the most traditional way of attaining fire for use in the ceremonies is using an implement. We'll show photos later where they use ropes and they have a stick and they have a board, and the board has a hole in it. You stick the stick in it. There's certain types of wood prescribed for this. And they create friction. They use a rope and they turn the stick. So they call that churning. And they churn this device to create the fire. So fire created in that way is called Brahmagni. And then we have Prajapati Agni. This is fire given to the brahmachari when he is given the sacred thread and begins performing the Samhita Danam. This is the fire ceremony performed by unmarried people. Of course, the fire ceremonies like the Agnihotra, only married people in Vedic times are allowed to perform these. And even sannyasis are not allowed to perform fire ceremonies because it creates karma. They're supposed to stay aloof from all karma. The sannyasis didn't stay in one place in those days. The monks, the renunciates, they would travel every 3 days, every 6 days. They have to move to another new place. And they could go and knock on the doors and beg for food 3 times, not at the same place. In the day, they can beg 3 times. And if they're given food, they eat. If they're not given food, they don't eat. They did a lot to avoid karma. In the rainy season, they could stay put if it was unsafe to travel. Otherwise, they have to move around. So they're not getting any attachments. And of course, they could not be ordained to participate in these Vedic ceremonies because they might have to leave. They might have to go somewhere for a higher spiritual purpose. And of course, if you say you're going to participate, you're a part of that sankalpa, then you should participate. You should finish the rituals. But also just the Agni is action, it's fire. So they would stay away from fire ceremonies in particular. So then we have the 3 Vedic fires, a part of the 5 ritual fires, the Garhapati Agni. This is given to the householder at the time of marriage, and that's kept burning constantly for rituals. We'll talk more about this. And then there's the Dakshina Agni. This is where the fire, where the offerings are made to the ancestors and exorcisms are performed there. And then the Kravyadagni. This is the fire of the funeral pyre. Kravyada is the name of that particular fire. And so these, we could say, are the 5 ritual forms of Agni. But then there's 5 fires in the body as well, as described by the Mahabharata. So this is Sharira Panchagni. Pancha 5, Agni fire, and Sharira means body. So 5 fires in the body, according to the Mahabharata. And so one is Tejas, which could be translated as energy. One, in this case, one is Krodha, which is anger or passion. And then one is Chakshu. This is the eyes or the vision. And of course, they say that that has to do with Agni. The light comes, light is generated by the fire, and then this perception, this the receiving the light and the perception, it all has to do with Agni. They say even mental comprehension has to do with Agni. It's like digestion of the mental impression, and we understand it through the power of Agni. So the Ushma is number 4, warmth of the body. And then Agni Jarati is the digestive fire. It's another name for that. In Ayurveda, we talk about Pancha Pittas, and Pitta is like a fire in Ayurveda. We have the 3 doshas. Vata is like wind. Pitta is like fire. And Kapha is like water, maybe. These 3 doshas in the body. If we keep them balanced, we remain healthy. But they're always changing. By everything we do influences these doshas. If it gets a little hot, we have the air conditioner off, so it's quiet and you can hear me talking. And so if it gets a little warm in here, it will increase our pitta. But Ayurveda talks about subdoshas also. It's not just Vata, Pitta, Kapha, but there are 5 forms of Vata. And there's even 10 forms of Vata. We have the prana, Apana, Vyana, Udana, Samana, Vayu is all the forms of Vata. We won't go into all of that, but we'll go into the forms of Pitta in Ayurveda because it helps us understand this Agni element in the body. Agni is there in the body. So Ranjaka Pitta is in the liver and the spleen. It produces the blood. Because the blood carries vital nutrients and oxygen to the cells, it can be related to Tejas. Tejas is this higher, subtler fire, and even subtler than Pitta is Tejas. And so then we have Sadhaka Pitta, which is located in the heart. It helps maintain emotional balance in times of distress. When out of balance, it can give rise to passionate emotions. It could be related to Krodha. See, we're relating these to the Mahabharata, I guess, the Tejas Krodha. And so then Alochaka Pitta is located in the eyes and governs the vision. It can be related clearly to Chakshu in the Mahabharata. And so then the Brajaka Pitta is located in the skin and governs the complexion and warmth. It can be related to the Ushma from Mahabharata description. And then Pachaka Pitta is located in the stomach and intestines. It governs the process of digestion. It clearly relates to the Agni Jarati as described in Mahabharata. So this is the Ayurvedic description of those 5 different fires in the body. And so then there's Pancha Maha Agni, 5 Vedic fires. There are 3 main Vedic fires that in the simple Vedic altar, and we'll get into this very soon. There's 3 fires. Garhapatya, the Ahavaniya, and the Dakshinagni. But there's also 5, and more complex rituals we have 5, and we may have additional altars as well. But so these are the 5 Vedic fires that are maintained in every home. Though, you know, as I said, more commonly people keep 3 in practice. So the Garhapatya is the domestic fire. It's kept in the West. This one is supposed to be kept burning all the time. If it goes out, that's a problem. We have to do rituals to reestablish it. It's supposed to be kept burning all the time as an offering. But, you know, we take the fire from this one and put in the other altars for offering. In the number 5 on our list, the Ahavaniya, this is where offerings are made to the gods. And so before we make offerings to the gods in the Vedic system, we have to take the fire from the Garhapatya and light that Havaniya fire. If a lot of the offerings are cooked, we may boil milk for Agnihotra. You have to boil the milk before you can offer it. And we cook that from the Garhapatya fire. So then we have and that one's in the West, the Garhapatya. Havaniya fire is in the East. This is for the Vedic sacrifices, offerings to the gods. And so still, you know, the direction for the puja place is the East. Of course, ideally in Vastu, we'd have this whole fire arena to the southeast is the direction of Agni. But within that area, to the west, we have the Garhapatya fire. To the east, we have the Ahavaniya fire. And then to the south, we have the Dakshinagni fire. And still south is a direction for the ancestors. We always keep the image of the ancestors on the southern wall in our puja place or in a separate place. And then we can look to the south as we offer to the ancestors. So even in the Vedic system, the Dakshinagni for the ancestors is located to the south. And so then there's Sabhya fire, fire of assembly. This is optional. And the Avasatya fire is used for Agnihotra, possibly used for other ceremonies, is located to the north. So there's a correlation between all of this. We have the image of a guy with fire in the body, around the body, trying to illustrate. We just Googled for some of these images, so we did the best we can. But we're trying to illustrate that this fire is a cosmic force. It's throughout the cosmos, but it's within the body. So that's an interesting thing with this description of 5 fires in the body, 5 Vedic fire altars, 5 natural fires in the universe. It correlates that the body, the Vedic fire altars is an extension of the body. The universe is an extension of the body. It arises from the same. There's a teaching in the Taittiriya Upanishad that says that light in the sun is same as the light shining in the human soul. You are the same as that which is in the sun. And so that, that light that comes from the sun comes from the divine. It's the same as the animating force within the life of all beings, within humans. So we are through God, in God, we are the same. The Atma is one with God, they say. And so your soul is the same as God, and your soul is the same as the soul and everyone else. There's no separation like this. So through this practice, this Vedic practice, we can meditate on this, and we're making the offering to the fire, and it increases the Agni in the body. And through that power of Agni, that power of transformation, the offerings get carried to the inner planes. We're lighting the fire of higher awareness. We're linking ourselves to this cosmic power of fire. It's very mystical. The 5 Vedic fires are symbolic of the 5 fires in the world and the 5 fires in the body. The microcosm of the 5 worldly fires is contained within the macrocosm of the 5 worldly fires is contained within the microcosm of the 5 bodily fires. Through maintaining the 5 Vedic fires, people come to experience the connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm. The fire transforms consciousness, and the person becomes aware of their presence in Agni throughout the universe. By meditating on the fire in the body, one becomes aware of the nature of Agni and sees the fire within pervading the entire universe. And we can see that if we meditate enough on this digestive fire, the fire in the eyes, or the fire that gives warmth to the body, and we connect to that Mahabhuta Agni, that element, that mystical, subtle element of fire, then we can see that fire is the same as the fire in the sun, the fire in the lightning, the fire in the forest fire, the fire in the fire altar. Maybe it's easiest to see in the fire altar when we're making the offerings, chanting the mantras, and our consciousness gets elevated. Then it's easiest to see. We have to go into a meditative state of consciousness. These practices help us to do that. So they say there's 5 qualities of the fire. Through practicing Yajna, we begin to embody 5 qualities of the sacred fire. Number 1, fire is hot and bright. We are inspired by this to lead radiant, active lives full of wisdom and brilliance. Fire always goes up. You put stuff on top of the fire, it doesn't start burning down to avoid the stuff. It goes around and it goes up. Gravity pulls everything down, right? But fire goes up. It always has a tendency to go up. So like the flames that always rise, we should rise to spiritual ideals despite fear and temptations. If someone puts us down, we get back up. If we fall, if we stumble, we get back up. The fire, we want to emulate this. We want to take on this good quality of the fire. So number 3, anything approaching the fire becomes fire. You put anything in the fire, it feeds the fire, it becomes fire. We too should have this quality in our spiritual practice, to not be brought down by the negative energy of others around, but to uplift all that we come in contact with. And of course, when we start our practice, it can be helpful to avoid negative energies, negative influences. They say we should seek to have satsanga, not asanga, bad associations. We should have good associations that inspire us in our spiritual practices. They call this satsanga. We should avoid negative influences. We should not be listening to music about, I'm so sad, I'm so depressed, oh no. We should listen to happy, uplifting music, Carnatic music, Samaveda chanting, something nice that makes us feel good. A lot of people, they don't realize they're listening to music and it's depressing them. If you question that, there's a simple practice you can do to evaluate. I'm not telling you what to do what you want to do, but with knowledge, with wisdom, choose. You can write down before you do a practice. Like if you don't, I like listening to this record, this album, this MP3 or whatever. I don't know what we do now. Used to be records when I used to listen to some music. You'd put the record on the turntable. We also had tapes and CDs, but I don't think they use that anymore. A few years ago, I made these CD, DVD, of some different practices, and my students, I was like, we should make these DVDs and try to sell them. Like, oh yeah, great idea. They did a great job. They look beautiful. We still have them because, of course, no one bought any of them. The students, they didn't want to question me because I'm the teacher, but I asked them later, I said, why is no one buying any of these? They said, Swamiji, people don't use DVDs anymore. They just download it. They don't even have a DVD player, but they did a wonderful job and they printed on there and, put the nice cover they designed and everything. It was beautiful, nice DVDs. So we're working on getting some of that materials online so people can just download it, click. But if you, whatever it is, CD, DVD, whatever, SoundCloud or whatever we do, I don't know what it is, Apple Tunes. Write down before you listen, how are you feeling? Just sit and feel. I'm feeling a little happy. I'm feeling a little tired. I'm feeling a little depressed. And then listen and wait a few minutes, wait 15 minutes, and then write down again, how are you feeling? I feel less tired. I feel more lively. I feel a little bit agitated, a little bit anxious. I feel this, I feel whatever it is, write it down. And then don't just look at that one time and say, oh yeah, that's the conclusive answer to my question. How does this affect my consciousness? Do it on different days, do it several times, do it 5 times, do it 10 times, and then you'll start to see a trend. When I'm tired, it wakes me up, but it makes me feel more anxious every time. And then you can start to ask yourself, do I want to be feeling more anxious? Is it helping me or is this hurting me? It can be helpful to avoid some of these influences. I don't watch the news even now. I used to avoid a lot of things. Now I don't have to avoid so much because it doesn't bring me down so much. I guess I've done enough of the yajna that I've become a little bit like the fire, and it doesn't bring me down. It starts to bring the people up, but some things I still avoid. I still avoid the news. It's just so negative the way they portray it. Anything that's very important, I figure out in one way or the other. Someone will say something about it or post about it on their Facebook, and I don't look at much of that, but I'll notice something sometimes if it's important for me to know. As we begin our practice, that's important, but then later, as we become more like the Agni, like I said, then we start to uplift others by our presence, and then it matters less what we do. Then we can go to a place where everyone is very low energetically and bring them up. We could go to the prison and teach yoga. That's something people have been doing. I think Satchidananda here in Yogaville in Virginia started doing that. He's maybe the first to have done that in America, but now there's groups throughout America that are doing things like this, teaching yoga in the prisons, at least before the COVID was happening. The prisons have been a hotbed for the COVID, so I'm not sure people are doing it now. But that's obviously not a practice we should send someone just starting their practice to go do, because we have some of the worst criminals in the prison, theoretically, possibly. They have very angry, very violent consciousness. Maybe they're very depressed because they're imprisoned. They've lost their lives, to being imprisoned. A lot of negative emotions. Very, very negative energies there. So they can use the spiritual light, they can use the spiritual practices, but someone new to practice, new to teaching yoga, we shouldn't send them to the prison to go and teach there, because they'll just get pulled down by the criminals. They'll become like criminals. There's a story that my guru told about there was like a monastery of sannyasis, of monks, and they're doing their practices. And one night a thief came running, and he came and he knocked on their door, and he's like, I stole all this stuff from the town, and the people, they're chasing me. They've chased me for a long distance, and they're trying to kill me, and please help me. Can you hide me in there or something? And they said, you've been honest, you know, we don't want to see you to suffer. We have compassion, love and compassion for everybody. Please come in, we'll hide you. So he came in, they hid him, and the people came and they knocked on the door, and they're like, have you seen this guy? And they said, no, we haven't seen him. They lied to protect this man. And he was so impressed by their kindness and their generosity that he stayed and he studied with them for some time. And they taught him how to meditate and pray. They said, you don't need to steal things to be happy in the world. You know, you steal, then you want more things. If you learn to meditate, then you can learn to tap into this happiness that no one can take away from you. You'll be satisfied with what you have. You don't need to steal anymore. And when he left that place, he said, I'm going to change my ways. He said, but I have all these silver candlesticks and things that I stole from the people, and silver plates and everything nice like this. What use do I have for this now that I know the way to find happiness and I'm turning a new leaf? I don't want to be a thief anymore. He said, I don't know what to do, but I'm so thankful to you guys. I can't take it back to these people. They'll kill me. I don't even know for sure where I got all these things from. It's not possible to retrace my steps and go and find the place, you know, and no one has time. You can't go with me and all that kind of thing. Let me just donate this to you guys. And I don't know what you want to do with it. Maybe you can sell it and get something like you have simple robes. Maybe you get some nicer clothes or something. And of course, these guys were monks. So they took it. They said, thank you. We'll take what you offer. But they didn't want nicer robes. They're happy with their robes with holes in it. They're monks. They're sannyasis, right? And so they took these things and they put it in their temple to offer it to God. And they started using it in the pujas that they're doing. You know, they put the offerings on the nice silver plates and this kind of thing, and lamps that they'd gotten and all this kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, you know, something happens. The people in the nearby village, they start to notice. At first, they couldn't believe it. But the people start stealing things in the village, and they watched to see who this thief might be. And they couldn't believe it because it looked like it was one of the monks from the monastery. And they said, no, these guys are so pure. They're monks. We know them. They help us. They counsel us. They're so pure. They wouldn't. So, you know, at first they couldn't believe it. But then, you know, they watched again and they said, yeah, this is definitely the monks. This is unbelievable. We can't understand why this would be happening. And so they went to the head of this monastery and they said, you know, at first we couldn't believe it. And now, you know, we've watched multiple times and we've seen, and we're sure it's them. We even recognize the particular guys. We know these guys. These monks are stealing from us in the night. And that head of the monastery, the Matha, the head of the Mat, the head of the monastery, he meditated on it and he said, yes, they're influenced by the energy left on these things in the puja. We need to get rid of it. And they just threw it out. They took it and threw it in the water. Because those things had been stolen, they had that energy of theft. And when they used it for the puja, it was amplifying this energy, and then it was affecting these guys. We've got to be very careful because things can influence us, subtle things we're not even aware of. We go out. That's why when you come home before you do the puja, the yajna, you should take a bath. That's why ideally you take a bath and you wear new clothing. It's not always possible to wear brand new clothing, so at least wash your clothing. Or if that's not possible, you know, wash your hands, breathe out as you do, chant some mantras for purification and breathe out and allow those negative energies to wash away with the water as it runs over your hands. Sprinkle some water with mantras on your clothing if you don't have time to wash it every single time. Ideally, you could at least wash it, but it's hard to wash these like dhotis and things with this nice border, or sari, especially if it's silk. Silk, we don't need to wash as often. This is cotton, but even this border, we have to be careful how we wash it. When we can't put it in the dryer, we have to hang it somewhere to dry, but it's really big. So it can be difficult if someone's living in an apartment or something. Where can you hang these things? You know, it becomes hard to wash it every single time. Take some time for it to dry. So at least sprinkle it with some water, because we pick up energies from all over. Who knows? You went out and you step on something. This is why we take off our shoes and leave it before we go in a sacred place, before we do a ceremony. Because who knows what you step on? The thief, the murderer could have spit on the ground, and then you step there and you're carrying that energy from that person with you on your shoes. You can leave a lot behind if you leave your shoes outside the house when you come in. But then we still pick up some things and we still carry things. People glance at us. You may not even have to go out. You have a Facebook or some kind of presence online, and someone could see that, see your name, see your photo, and they send you the negative energy. You pick up a little bit of that. Of course, a guru doesn't have to worry about this because they become like the Agni. Agni doesn't have to worry about this. So just burn up everything. But if we're not burning up everything with our sadhana, then some practices and rituals for purification can be called for, until we get to that point where we can uplift everything and make everything bright light. Otherwise, the darkness around us can bring us down. So we did number 3, everything approaching it becomes fire. Number 4 is does not accumulate anything. So the fire doesn't accumulate anything. It reduces everything to ash. We should not accumulate karma and attachments, but use all of our possessions and good qualities for the benefit of all beings. Our body is not even ours. Eventually, we'll have to offer that to the funeral pyre, or to that fire in nature that breaks down the body through the digestion of the maggots and whatever will eat the body. If we can view our clothing not as ours, but it's been entrusted to us by God as a tool to use for service. Our vehicle. We drive somewhere and we serve God. We drive to our job and we do the work, and that's a seva. We're serving God. If we can have this attitude, we're not accumulating attachments, not accumulating karma, ideally. The fire doesn't accumulate. Fire gets rid of everything. The fire reduces everything to ash is number 5. We should eliminate what is false and remember that the body one day will be reduced to ash, or to dirt, at least. So these are the 5 qualities of the fire that we should try to emulate. Then there's the Pancha Agni Vidya. Vidya is knowledge, and this is a meditation that comes from the Upanishads. This is very small. I don't know that I can see this to read it to you. Maybe I can move this a little bit. Maybe I can see that better there, but then we'll need the notes also. Is this going to change which screen is being broadcast? So there's a meditation from the Upanishads called the Pancha Agni Vidya. Pancha 5, Agni, fire, Vidya, knowledge of. This meditation grants detachment from materialism and stimulates spiritual yearning. It brings knowledge of the difficulties of life and inspires a desire for liberation. This meditation reveals how creation is through Yajna. And that symbolism that comes in the Purusha Suktam in the Vedas talks about the creation of the world as a yajna, a sacred fire ceremony. So this Upanishad gives a meditation on the fire that helps us see that everything in the world is a sacrifice. And it brings about those qualities, gives us detachment, increases our spiritual yearning. It shows how the body is linked to the universe and how the mind's true nature manifests as will in the universe. And so you can read more, you can look up all these things and read more about it. We're just trying to introduce these concepts. I'm not trying to teach this meditative practice per se. So in each case here, we have 5. In each case, there's a fire, there's a fuel, and there's an oblation or an offering. So in the first, heaven is the fire, the sun is the fuel, and faith is the offering. In the second, Parjanya, the rain god, is the fire. The year is the fuel, and Soma is the offering. And in the next, the world is the fire, the earth is the fuel, and the rains are the offering. And then the man is the fire in the next. The open mouth is the fuel, and food is the offering. And in the next, the woman is the fire, the womb is the fuel, and the seminal fluid is the offering. And so if you think about these, there's a connection. Maybe start with the woman or the man and work your way back to the more cosmic level. There's a connection there. And so it's an interesting meditation, an interesting practice. There's also a Pancha Agni sadhana. This image here is of I think it's a woman nun wearing black for this practice. This was a student of Shivananda, I think Satyananda. Had a place, I think, in Rishikesh called Rikpeet that he did for many years, the Pancha Agni sadhana. For 1 year, he had 1 fire. For another year, he had 2 fires. For another year, he had 3 fires. Another year, he had 4 fires. And the 5th fire is. So this sadhana is intense. Tapasya sort of practice. Tapasya means burning. And this is literally, tapasya. If anyone has been to India, they know it's crazy, crazy hot in India. It gets very hot in the summer in parts of America. Even in Virginia, it gets quite warm. It gets in the 90s and it's very humid. So it's very hot. In parts of the Midwest, it'll get to be 120 degrees. It's drier though, so it's a little bit more tolerable sometimes, especially if you can find some shade. But California's hot, Florida's hot, Louisiana's hot, Texas hot. Maybe if you're up in Canada, it's not so hot. But in India, very, 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 very hot. They're very much south of where we are, closer to the equator. And so it's very hot. And then in the hot of the summertime, they do this practice, the Pancha Agni Sadhana, where they have 5 fires. And they'll put 5, 1 in each of the cardinal directions around them. And they light the fire. And the 5th fire, they say, is the sun. It can only safely be performed by advanced yogis with the direct guidance of a guru. During the heat of the summer, they sit in the hot sun, and the men will traditionally wear a loincloth, a kalpina. And then they'll put vibhuti all over the body, the sacred white ash all over the body. And this, they say, helps you from getting actually physically burnt up, because, pieces of the fire may pop at you and this kind of thing. And the vibhuti will protect you. In the same way, when they do the intense tapasya of the kavadi and they stick spikes through the body, in Tamil Nadu, they stick metal spikes through the back and through the tongue and the cheeks and things. They'll put the vibhuti to protect the person from getting bad places, hitting a crucial vein or something. And it reduces the bleeding and reduces the inflammation and all that kind of thing. It has spiritual effects to protect people. And this is the ash from the fire. Again, vibhuti. There's a special process through which they make this vibhuti. There's certain mantras and certain substances they're supposed to use. Om Somaya Swaha. And they're using different grass and cow dung. They make offerings of sesame seeds and ghee and maybe milk and other things. And they burn it up really well to a white ash, and they may scent that. So this Pancha Agni Sadhana, not anyone can do it. In the heat of summer, and even in regular conditions, very, very quickly, within minutes from this practice, a normal person might experience sunstroke or dehydration or other heat related issues. Requires much focus and effort to cool the body during this practice. It builds discipline, it builds imperviousness to difficulties and physical adversity. It gives control of the anatomy for the yogis, and it helps to build concentration. It can burn away karma as well. When my guru had me do this practice for a while, we didn't use 4 fires in the cardinal directions. And sometimes they'll do it in this way, where they just put the cow dung all the way around in a circle. And when I did it, I had the cow dung maybe a little bit closer than in this image, and then just a ring of fire around. And then also for the 5th fire, what my guru had me do is wear a turban, kind of like this woman is wearing in the photo, and then kept a metal bowl on top of the turban. The turban kept it from like physically burning too much on the head. And then in the metal bowl was built a 5th fire. And then you sit for some time and do the meditative practices. And you've got to go into a higher state to be able to sustain that without severe harm to the body. They say of this practice that there's 5 internal fires within a person that dries up a person's being. People instinctively avoid facing these in themselves. The great yogis face these 5 inner fires, and it's said that only a yogi who can face the inner fires is capable of facing the 5 external fires of the Pancha Agni Sadhana. If one attempts to practice without facing these, it will be an act of suicide, it has been said. The external fires quickly dry up the fluids of the body as the temperature reaches a scorching 90 degrees Celsius, which is 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The 5 internal fires are desire, kama, anger, krodha, greed, lobha, ego, ahamkara, and attachment, moha. So if a person faces these, then they can face the outer fires. But also with the guru's guidance, the outer fire practice could help a person to face these potentially. But this is the kind of practice that's very potentially dangerous. And we'll talk about one more practice like this in the Tibetan yogic tradition. There's a goddess called Tumo. There's a practice called Tumo. She's a fierce goddess, and she's the embodiment of heat and passion. In the cold of winter, in the high Himalayas, the yogis sit in a loincloth, kalpina, in the snow. And we have an image here that's a drawing depiction of it, of the practice, and it shows the mystical fire inside the body, and he's sitting. He's not in the snow, but a lot of time they'll sit in the snow physically. They're getting wet from the snow. The freezing temperature and moisture would cause frostbite or kill a normal person in 15 minutes. So the yogis do the Tumo practice to increase inner fire and elevate the body temperature. They did some studies on these Tibetan lamas that do the Tumo practice, and they recreated the situation in a laboratory where it's like freezing cold, and they had put wet cloths even on their body. And they were finding these yogis were able to elevate their body temperature by even maybe 10 degrees. And they would get so warm that the water on the cloths would evaporate. A normal person would shiver immediately, and they'd have hypothermia and frostbite and die very quickly. But these guys are surviving. They elevate the body temperature and even cause the water on the cloths to evaporate by doing this practice of the inner fire, the Tumo practice. I'm looking at the notes here. The inner heat evaporates the water on the body, and they'll melt the snow when they do it out. In the snow around them will melt and go away. It's an advanced practice which should only be attempted by accomplished yogis with the guidance of qualified guru. I did a similar practice when I slept outside one winter doing sadhana to keep the body from freezing. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about that. My guru, I went and I spoke to my guru, and my guru said, "Where are you living?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm living with my parents. I moved back in with my parents, and they let me set up a fire altar in the garage, and I'm just doing fire ceremony, fire ceremony, fire ceremony." And my guru basically told me, "No, you shouldn't be there. You should leave." And so I did, with faith. I had nowhere to go. I had one pair of robes like this or so, and maybe a japa mala and a book of some mantras. And I just took those and I left, and I walked, and I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I just walked, and I kept walking. And for 6-7 months, I stayed outside. And in the winter, it got very cold. In the winter, I remember I would go to sleep, and within 30 minutes or so, I'd wake up and the body would be shivering. And so then I'd walk around to warm myself up, or do some practices a little bit to warm myself up. And then I'd go back to sleep. So maybe 30 minutes of doing something, 30 minutes sleep, and then I'd wake up shivering. And so then in the next day, I'd be feeling no good. I didn't have much energy because I wasn't getting good sleep. It was very interrupted. And so I couldn't do my sadhana. I couldn't do much of anything. So I realized this was not working. So I started doing this practice like this. And I'm not sure exactly how they do the Tumo practice. I know these kind of things are supposed to be kind of secret, but nowadays we can probably find a description online. But the practice I was doing, I would meditate on a red triangle shape in the Manipura chakra, this navel chakra. And I would visualize it. I would wait until I could see it there. And I would chant mantras, like Agni mantras, like Om Ram Agnaye Namaha. Or I might chant some Veda mantras for Agni. Agni mihile purohitam yasya devam ritvijaham hota aram ratnadatamam. Or just Ram, Om Ram, Om Ram, Ram, Ram. I'm not encouraging anyone to sleep outside in the wintertime. I'm just describing the practice that I had done, and I couldn't have done this without the grace of my guru. My guru said, go, and I went with faith. And so he empowered that practice. This is what he had me to do. Otherwise, I couldn't have done it. None of it. It comes from us. It comes from beyond. We have to have the grace. So I'd meditate until I could see the red triangle there. And then I'd chant the Agni mantras, and I'd do that until I felt a lot of heat in the belly. And then I'd spread that heat throughout the body, and I'd do that until I could feel a lot of heat throughout the body. Then I'd spread that heat to the general area around me until I felt like a lot of heat around in the general area. And then what I always did as a last step is I would just send that heat that I generated through the practice to people who were cold and say, Lord, help them through the merit of this practice. And, I just had faith that somehow I'd be okay. And I'd try to send that heat generated to them so they could have comfort and warmth. Even in those times, I had one jacket when I started, a coat, winter coat, but I saw a homeless man who didn't have a coat, and I gave my coat to him. And then I had no coat. I'm just in robes like this. And, incidentally, that guy was kind of schizophrenic, and he lost the coat like the next day. Next time I saw him next day, I'm like, where is my nice winter coat? He's like, well, I don't know. I had it. I don't know. I'm just like, oh my God. I gave it to this guy, and now he lost it immediately. So neither of us have a coat. I'm thinking that was stupid. But, I did it out of love, out of compassion, and I was okay. And I had faith that I would be okay. And I was okay when I started doing that like that with God's grace, with my guru's grace. Then I would sleep through the night, and I'd wake up feeling warm. And in that time, I wasn't eating much food. I wasn't drinking much water. Once in a week, I might eat food or drink water. I was not going to the bathroom because one of my gurus had always said, follow the laws of the land. And if you're homeless, where do you go to the bathroom? It's not legal to go to the bathroom. Maybe you could go into McDonald's or something, but when you go into McDonald's dressed like this, it just creates a commotion. And then if you use their bathroom without buying anything, people get upset. You'll probably get arrested. So you're not legally allowed to go to the bathroom generally. So I just trained myself not to go to the bathroom so I could follow what my guru was teaching we should do in those times. It was very mystical times for me, a lot of sadhana. Those times were nice. Those times were fulfilling. Sometimes I long for those times. Honestly, now I do a lot of typing on the computer and all this kind of thing, and it's very much in the body. It's not as focused on the spiritual things. Hopefully the Lord will bless me to do more intense sadhanas like that in the future. It was very nice, very uplifting time. I think that helps the world a lot, but it, we help in the ways we're told to do. My guru said, go. And so I went with faith. My guru says, do these things now. So I've got to do these things now. But, by God's grace, it was always okay. But, we can practice these kind of practices. We don't have to sleep outside in the snow and risk our lives, but we can practice. We can have a thermometer and meditate on the red triangle and see if we can elevate our body temperature by a degree or two. And, that's something as a yogi, as someone doing these practices, we have to be aware of, because these practice, even mantra chanting can increase the body temperature. I believe I told the story in a previous class about the Satchidananda Swami giving the lime to the Pope. I told that in this class, I'm pretty sure, because the practices the yogis do, it heats the body, it heats the system. When you chant a lot of mantras, anyone who's chanted a lot of mantras realizes you start sweating as a part of that process. It elevates the body temperature, so you start sweating. You might need to drink more water to help deal with that. Whenever you start chanting a lot, you'll start sweating. But then, of course, when you are not just chanting, but you light the fire, then it's hot. And some of the yajna is kind of like this pancha agni sadhana. It's not quite so intense, but it can be intense because pieces pop out of the fire and it'll get you. You have a nice new dhoti or sari or whatever, it may burn a hole in it, and it may burn your flesh, get on your hand and burn you. And then there's the physical heat. And sometimes if the fire is not burning bright, you get a lot of smoke, and that smoke will blow in your face, and it's hard to breathe and hard to see and hard to keep going. And your lungs start clearing things out because of all the smoke and the herbs and the healing properties. And so you're sniffling, you can't see, your tears coming from your eyes, and it can be very hot, especially in the summer. A lot of times we've not had a nice shelter over. We just have to sit outside somewhere, and then the sun comes down, it's very hot. The fire comes, and basically you're performing this pancha agni sadhana. And so, of course, some of the nature of the rituals deals with water, and we'll get into that later. And dealing with the water and the cooling energies helps us to counterbalance that, so we don't overheat ourselves. We've got to do some heating things to burn up our karmas, to stimulate awareness, but we don't want to get ungrounded. We don't want to overstimulate ourselves. And so keeping that balance can be tricky in our spiritual practice. So having some awareness of these things can be very good, can be very useful. Can we elevate the body temperature? Can we lower the body temperature? Can we have that awareness of how hot the body is, and if it's too hot, and if we're too stimulated? That's what the practice of Ayurveda is very useful. If we're watching these doshas, if you know how to see the doshas in your pulse, if you know how to see the doshas on your tongue, if there's a coating on your tongue, if it's dark or kind of brown or purplish, then that's vata. If it's white, that's kapha. If it's kind of yellowish or greenish, if the tongue is bright red, then that's a sign of pitta. You can taste your urine. The yogis use the urine for healing. If you taste your urine, and the urine should be a little bit salty, a little bit bitter, But if it's very sweet, that's a sign of kapha. If it's very bitter and somewhat astringent, that's a sign of vata. And if it's too salty, extra salty, maybe that's a sign of your kidneys are failing. If it's just extremely salty, all the protein comes out in the urine. But it's a sign of pitta, or if it's a spicy, pungent, then that could be a sign of pitta as well. We can keep track of the doshas, watching the tongue, noticing the mental state, taking the pulse, tasting the urine, all these kind of things we can use, even looking at the nails and the qualities of, there's so many ways we can keep a track of the doshas in the body. And of course, if your mind is too anxious, do things that are calming. If your mind is too dull, stimulate yourself. We've always got to be watching this balance of things as we do these kind of practices, because once we start using the mantras and the sacred fire, intense spiritual energies start working within us and around us. And so it's very important that we be mindful and have some awareness. And so doing some practices, that austerities like this, not necessarily to that extent, like where we'd sit in the snow in the cold, but to a safer, limited extent, to do things like this help us to gain awareness. To some extent, if you're in a higher state of consciousness, you may just be fine. It will balance itself out. But then there are other times where we're swaying in one direction or the other. Too hot, we need to do cooling things. Too cool, we need to do heating things. Too stimulated, we need to do calming things. Too dull, we need to do things that will activate us. These kind of concepts we have to be aware of, and these practices are useful. So it's very interesting. Very, very interesting, because these are cosmic forces in the body, in the mantra, in the sacred fire, in the offerings we make, and throughout the universe. And we're calling these sacred forces as we do the fire ceremony. We're calling, Agni is not just that fire. It's an active thing to watch. As we meditate, if you meditate on a statue of the god, it's very still, you may get very bored, but the fire, you can keep watching, and it's moving, it pops and cracks, and it's moving. You might have to do things to keep it burning. It's an active image to watch, so we can remain powerfully focused. But it's not just that physical fire. It's that cosmic power of fire, understanding in the mind, the higher spiritual awareness as well that comes about through the practice, the illumination, when we can close our eyes and see spiritual light within. We start to awaken that higher perception through doing these practices, and we unite ourselves with the higher force of Agni, which is in the body, but it comes from God. It's in the lightning, but it comes from God. It's in the sun, but it comes from God. We start to see we are the sun, and we start to awaken within ourselves that power of luminosity that is in the sun. And the yogis can do amazing things, there's stories. There's the story of Adi Shankaracharya that we'll tell later again. But when he was a monk, and they said he shouldn't perform a funeral for his family because he's a renunciate. They're supposed to perform the funerals before they renounce of all their families, so that they don't have that duty. They don't have to come back and do it. Even if no one does it, the people will be fine, because the ritual has already been done to ensure their soul is progressing. But somehow, it came to Shankaracharya that he should go and do his mother's funeral. And when he went, the Brahmins refused to give him fire to light the fire. They said, because you're a monk, that's inappropriate. That's not the tradition. He said, yeah, but I am led to do that. My mother's message got to me, and I got told, yes, do that. I felt inspired to do that, so now I'm here to do it. They wouldn't give the fire. And so he started fire in his hand. In his right hand, the fire came, and he put it in the funeral pyre so he could perform the rituals. The yogis can do miraculous things like this because they've controlled the fire in the body, which is the same as the fire in the world, in the universe around them. And so they can light a fire mystically. They can elevate their body temperature. They can elevate your body temperature. If there are some healers do like this. There's some of the better Ayurvedic healers. They'll see a person and their body's too cold. They have too much kapha. They have too much vata, not enough pitta, not enough tejas. And so the healer does some practices to stimulate some fire energy and sends it to that person and elevates their body temperature to balance their doshas. Or they could cool their body temperature if they have too much pitta and it's hurting their liver, hurting their stomach, they have acid reflux, they could send that energy. And people who do breath work do that kind of thing. They lend their energy to the client that they work with, the good Ayurvedic practitioner. They put their higher awareness there when they take the pulse. It starts to release the negative energies. It's a very mystical practice that, you know, we start to really see these things as we perform yajna. So it's very interesting to just look at the connection between the outer fires and the inner fire. And it's and we can read about it and think about it, and it prepares us for that experience that is stimulated through the practice. Om.